You're a thief!
No, you are the thief here!
Liar! You stole everything!
Have you ever come home early and discovered the two people you trusted most plotting your destruction? I'm talking about walking into your own sanctuary and finding them planting evidence that could send you to prison. That's exactly what happened to Florence Hank. Her husband Lucas and her former protege Vivian thought they had the perfect plan. Forge documents, frame Florence for embezzlement, steal her $8 million inheritance, and take custody of her unborn child. They even rehearsed what they'd say when she gave birth behind bars. She was always too soft for this world, Lucas whispered to Vivian as they kissed against Florence's desk. I'm doing her a favor. But Lucas made one catastrophic mistake. He forgot that 3 years ago his wife saved the life of the most dangerous man in New York. And when Florence's phone vibrated with a text from a ghost she thought she'd never see again, the words sent ice through her veins. Don't move. Don't breathe. I'm watching. You're safe. You're about to witness the most brutal takedown Manhattan's elite have ever seen. This is a story about betrayal, about a sociopath who thought charm made him untouchable, and about obsessive love that would paint the city red for one woman's protection. Before we dive in, do me a favor. If you love stories about people who rise from the ashes and burn their enemies to the ground, subscribe and make sure you're following along. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be staging your destruction? I want to hear your stories. Now let's begin. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hank penthouse on the Upper East Side, casting geometric shadows across imported marble floors. Florence Hank stood frozen in the hallway outside her study, one hand protectively cradling her 6-month baby bump, the other clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She'd come home an hour early from her OB appointment. The doctor had rescheduled at the last minute, and now she wished she'd never walked through that door. Through the crack in the study door she could see everything with crystal clarity. Her husband Lucas, the man who'd kissed her goodbye that morning and told her he loved her, was systematically destroying her life. His sleeves were rolled up, his designer watch catching the light as he pulled documents from her personal safe. The safe only the two of them had the combination to. But he wasn't alone. Vivian Chin stood beside him in a blood-red power suit, her dark hair pulled into a severe ponytail, holding a stack of papers that Florence recognized immediately. Bank statements. Account records. Legal documents with Florence's forged signature bleeding across the bottom in ink that hadn't had time to dry. The timing has to be perfect, Vivian was saying, her voice sharp and clinical. She'd been Florence's mentee once. The brilliant young attorney Florence had championed and promoted when everyone else called her too aggressive. Now that same voice dripped with venom. We plant these today, trigger the audit tomorrow, and by Friday the fraud investigation begins. The prenup protects nothing if she's a criminal. Lucas laughed, actually laughed, as he shattered the study window from the inside with a decorative crystal paperweight Florence's late father had given her. The sound of breaking glass made Florence flinch. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch her world implode. Once she's in Rikers, Vivian continued, stepping over the broken glass in her Louboutins without flinching, the baby becomes yours, the money becomes ours, and Florence becomes nothing but a cautionary tale about trust. Lucas grabbed Vivian's waist and pulled her against Florence's desk, the same desk where Florence had spent countless nights building her career, the same desk where she'd told Lucas she was pregnant and watched him pretend to be happy. They kissed with violent hunger, Vivian's fingers tangling in Lucas's hair, and Florence tasted bile in her throat. She was always too soft for this world, Lucas murmured against Vivian's neck. All that talk about redemption and second chances. I'm doing her a favor, really. Prison might toughen her up. Florence's phone vibrated in her hand, the buzz so sudden and violent she nearly dropped it. Unknown number. Her finger hovered over the decline button, but something made her look at the screen. The text message appeared in stark white letters against black. Kitchen. No. Silent. Before she could process what was happening, a second message arrived. I'm parked outside. Black Mercedes. Get in. Or stay and die. Choose fast. Sungjae. Florence's blood turned to ice water. Sungjae. She hadn't heard that name in 3 years. Not since she'd stood in a federal courtroom and defended him against racketeering charges that should have put him away for life. Not since she'd looked into those black diamond eyes and seen something that terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. Not since he'd whispered to her after the acquittal. "If you ever need me, Florence, I'll burn the world for you." She thought it was just talk. The kind of thing criminals said to the lawyers who saved them. She'd gone back to her life, married Lucas 6 months later, and forgotten about the Korean Mafia boss with the beautiful face and the dead eyes. But he hadn't forgotten about her. Florence's hand went to her belly, feeling her daughter kick against her palm. Strong, insistent, alive. In the study, Lucas was typing something into Florence's laptop, probably accessing her encrypted files with the password he'd sweet-talked out of her months ago. Vivian was photographing the staged break-in with her phone, creating the evidence they'd need to destroy Florence's credibility. Florence had two choices: walk into that study and confront them, or trust a ghost from her past who dealt in blood and bullets. The old Florence, the woman who'd sacrificed her career for marriage, who'd softened her edges and learned to compromise, would have confronted them. Would have believed she could reason with Lucas, appeal to whatever shred of humanity he had left. But Florence was dying. And something colder, something sharper was being born in her place. She turned and walked silently to the kitchen, her bare feet soundless on marble. On the counter sat a burner phone she'd never seen before, matte black and pristine. He picked it up. One text message waited. "Good girl. Leave through the service entrance. Don't look back. I've got you now." Florence grabbed her purse, slipped her feet into the Valentinos she'd kicked off by the door, and walked out of her penthouse without looking back. Behind her she could hear Lucas and Vivian laughing about how easy this was, how Florence would never see it coming. They had no idea that the most dangerous man in New York had been watching Florence for 3 years. That every laugh, every kiss, every forged signature was being recorded by surveillance systems they didn't know existed. That their perfect plan was about to become their execution. The black Mercedes waited at the curb, engine running, windows tinted so dark they looked like oil. The back door opened as Florence approached. And sitting in the shadows, looking exactly like death in an expensive suit, was Sung-jae. "Hello, Florence," he said softly, his accent making her name sound like a promise and a threat. "Did you miss me?" Florence's hand trembled as she turned her key in the penthouse lock at exactly 2:17 p.m. Dr. Morrison had cancelled her appointment at the last minute. Something about an emergency C-section. And Florence had decided to come home instead of wandering Manhattan's boutiques alone. She'd been craving Lucas's company lately, that warmth he used to radiate back when their marriage wasn't a performance. The moment she stepped inside, she knew something was wrong. Voices, low and urgent, coming from her study at the end of the hall. Lucas's voice, tight with concentration. And another voice, female, sharp, familiar in a way that made Florence's stomach clench. "Vivian." Florence froze, her pregnant belly brushing against the entryway table. What was Vivian Chen doing in her home? The woman who'd been Florence's protégée, who Florence had mentored through law school, who'd sent a suspiciously distant congratulations text when Florence announced her pregnancy. The woman Florence hadn't seen in 3 months. She moved toward the study on silent feet, her designer flats soundless against imported marble. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the crack Florence saw her entire world shatter. Lucas stood at her personal safe, the antique her father had given her, the one that held her legal documents, her inheritance papers, her life. His fingers moved across the keypad with practiced ease, entering the combination Florence had foolishly shared with him on their first anniversary. The safe door swung open, and Lucas pulled out folders with Florence's father's law firm logo embossed on the covers. "These are perfect," Vivian said, stepping into view in a crimson suit that looked like war paint. She held a stack of bank statements Florence had never seen before, documents covered in numbers that made her blood run cold. "Once we plant these, the paper trail is complete. Florence Hank embezzler. Florence Hank identity thief. Florence Hank criminal." Lucas laughed, and the sound was so cold Florence barely recognized it. He picked up the crystal paperweight from Florence's desk, the one her father had used for 40 years, and hurled it at the window. Glass exploded inward, glittering like diamonds as it scattered across Persian rugs. "Stage the break-in," Lucas said, brushing glass from his shoulders. "Make it look like she panicked, tried to hide the evidence, and got sloppy." Vivian was already placing the forged documents into the safe, her movements efficient and practiced. "The prenup protects nothing if she's a criminal," she said, her voice carrying that ruthless precision Florence had once admired. She'll give birth in Rikers. You'll have full custody, all her money, and I'll have you. Everyone wins. Everyone except Florence, Lucas murmured, and then he grabbed Vivian's waist and pulled her against Florence's desk. The desk where Florence had drafted briefs until 3 a.m., where she'd built her career before sacrificing it for this marriage. They kissed with savage hunger, Vivian's manicured nails raking through Lucas's hair, and Florence's hand flew to her mouth to stop the sound trying to escape. She was always too soft for this world, Lucas whispered against Vivian's throat. Too trusting. Too convinced everyone deserves redemption. I'm doing her a favor, really. Florence's phone vibrated in her purse, the buzz so violent she nearly gasped. She fumbled it out with shaking hands. Unknown number. 3 words on the screen. Kitchen. No. Silent. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She backed away from the study door, her breath coming in shallow gasps that made her daughter kick frantically inside her. In the kitchen, sitting on the granite counter like it had always belonged there, was a matte black burner phone. Florence picked it up. One message waited. I'm parked outside. Black Mercedes. Get in. Or stay and die. Choose fast. Sungjae. Sungjae. The ghost from 3 years ago. The monster she'd saved. The man who'd looked at her in that courtroom and promised her protection she'd never need. Except now she needed it desperately. Behind her, Lucas and Vivian were laughing about how easy this was, how Florence would never suspect. Florence grabbed her purse, slipped on her shoes and walked toward the service entrance. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Because if she did, she'd see the ashes of everything she'd believed in. And the black Mercedes waiting at the curb was offering her something far more dangerous than love. It was offering her vengeance. Florence's heels clicked against pavement as she ran toward the black Mercedes idling at the curb, her breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. The back door swung open before she reached it, and the interior smelled like leather and danger and something darkly expensive she couldn't name. She slid inside and the door closed behind her with the finality of a coffin lid. Sungjae sat in the shadows and Florence's breath caught despite everything. He was older than she remembered, sharper, more lethal, with new ink creeping up his neck in elegant Korean characters she couldn't read. His black hair was slicked back, revealing a face that belonged on magazine covers if those eyes weren't so utterly dead. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Florence's wedding dress, and when he smiled, it was the smile of an apex predator recognizing wounded prey. "Hello, Florence," he said, his accent making her name sound like silk over steel. "You look beautiful. Motherhood suits you. What the hell is happening?" Florence's voice cracked, her hand instinctively protective over her belly. Why are you? 3 years ago, you saved my life when every attorney in this city abandoned me, Sungjae interrupted, his voice soft and absolutely lethal. You walked into that federal courtroom 7 months pregnant with hope, and you fought for me like I was worth saving. You told the jury that everyone deserves one person who refuses to let them fall. He leaned forward and Florence saw something burning in those black diamond eyes. I told you then, if you ever need me I'll burn the world for you. Did you think I was lying? He handed her an iPad and Florence's hands shook as she took it. The screen showed security footage. Her study, her safe, Lucas and Vivian moving through her home like they owned it. The timestamp read 3 months ago. Then 2 months ago. Then last week. Footage after footage of them forging documents, planting evidence, staging her destruction with the precision of surgeons. You've been watching me, Florence whispered, horror and fury warring in her chest. You've been watching my marriage fall apart for months, watching them plot to destroy me, and you did nothing? Sungjae's expression didn't change. I was waiting to see if you'd save yourself. You're a predator, Florence. One of the best legal minds I've ever encountered. I wanted to see if you remembered that, or if you'd let that fool you married convince you that you were prey. Florence wanted to scream. Wanted to hit him. Wanted to demand why he thought he had the right to test her while her life burned down around her. But before she could speak, Sungjae handed her a manila folder. Everything you need to destroy them, he said. Bank records proving Lucas has been embezzling from Whitmore Capital for 3 years. Evidence that Vivian bribed the Ethics Review Board. Documentation of every forged signature, every planted document, every lie they've constructed. He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was ice. But you have to be willing to get your hands bloody, Florence. The woman you were, the one who believed in redemption and second chances, she can't win this fight. That woman dies today or you do. Choose. Florence stared at the folder, her daughter kicking frantically inside her as if sensing the moment her mother's soul was about to change forever. Behind her, in that penthouse, Lucas and Vivian were celebrating their victory. They thought she was broken. Thought she was soft. They'd forgotten who she used to be. Florence opened the folder, and her eyes scanned documents that would end Lucas's life as thoroughly as he'd tried to end hers. When she looked up at Sungjae, something new burned in her gaze. Something cold and hungry and absolutely merciless. Tell me what to do, she said. Sungjae's smile was devastating. Now we go to war. The Tribeca safe house was nothing like Florence expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River, minimalist furniture in shades of cream and charcoal, art on the walls that probably cost more than most people's homes. It was a gilded cage owned by one of Sungjae's shell companies, and for the next however long this took, it would be her war room. You can't go to the police, Sungjae said, setting down her hastily packed overnight bag. He moved through the space like he owned it, which he did, pouring her sparkling water in crystal that caught the late afternoon light. Lucas's cousin is Detective Marcus Hank, Brooklyn SVU. And Vivian's already planted enough evidence in your accounts to make you look guilty. You walk into a precinct, you walk out in handcuffs. Florence sank onto the sofa, her hand pressed against her belly where her daughter was doing gymnastics. The reality crashed over her in waves. She couldn't go home, couldn't access her own money without triggering alerts, couldn't trust anyone in her former life. Everything she'd built had been a house of cards, and Lucas had been planning the demolition for months. So what's your plan? She asked, hating how her voice shook. Sungjae crouched in front of her, bringing himself to eye level, and Florence's breath caught. Up close she could see the new scars on his knuckles, the way his jaw was sharper than she remembered, the absolute focus in those black diamond eyes. We let them think they're winning. You play the devastated wife. Beg Lucas for reconciliation. Pretend you don't know about Vivian. While you're performing, my team dismantles every ally he has, every bribed official, every piece of their conspiracy. When we strike, it won't be a fight. It'll be an execution. That could take weeks, Florence protested. Months even. I'm 6 months pregnant, Sungjae. I can't. You can. His hand covered hers on her belly, and the touch sent electricity through her entire body. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Florence. He just forgot. I'm here to remind you. The next 3 days were a blur of surveillance footage, financial records, and encrypted communications. Sungjae's team was a ghost network. Hackers in Seoul, investigators in London, fixers in Manhattan who moved through the city like smoke. They fed Florence information in real time. Lucas meeting with his accountant to discuss asset protection, Vivian bribing a court clerk over martinis at the plaza, the psychiatric evaluations being forged by a doctor who'd lost his license in 2019. Florence documented everything in meticulous legal briefs, her old instincts roaring back to life. This was what she'd been. A predator in designer suits, a legal assassin who'd never lost a case that mattered. Lucas had convinced her to soften those edges, to be the supportive wife who baked cookies and attended charity lunches. He'd turned her into prey. Never again. She worked late into the nights, her laptop screen casting blue light across the safe house. And every night, Sungjae appeared like a shadow, bringing her food she didn't ask for, sitting across from her in silence that somehow felt more intimate than conversation. She'd catch him watching her with an intensity that made her skin burn, a hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with possession. Why are you really doing this? Florence asked one night, exhausted and raw and tired of pretending she didn't feel the charge between them. You could have walked away 3 years ago. Paid your legal fees and forgotten about me. Sungjae set down his whiskey, and when he looked at her, Florence saw something that terrified her more than Lucas's betrayal ever could. I tried, he said softly. For 3 years I tried to forget the woman who looked at a monster and saw a human being worth defending. I failed. Every single day I failed. He stood, and the distance between them felt like miles and inches all at once. You're in my blood now, Florence. And I protect what's mine. Florence should have been horrified. Should have run. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Florence was sitting at her desk at Sterling and Associates, the firm where she'd made partner before Lucas convinced her pregnancy meant she should take a step back, when the process server walked in at 11:37 a.m. Young kid, probably 22, apologetic eyes as he handed her the manila envelope that would officially end her marriage. "Florence Hank? You've been served." Her hands didn't shake as she opened it. She'd been preparing for this moment for 5 days, rehearsing her reaction in Sungjae's safe house mirror until the devastation looked genuine. But nothing could have prepared her for the words on the page. Petition for divorce. Grounds: adultery, theft, mental instability. Attorney for petitioner, Vivian Chin Esquire. Florence's vision blurred, and this time she didn't have to fake the tears. Vivian. Her protégé. Her friend. Now her executioner. In a conflict of interest so grotesque it would have gotten her disbarred if she hadn't already bribed the Ethics Review Board. The accusations were surgical in their cruelty. Adultery with a John Doe. Florence had supposedly met at a hotel bar. Embezzlement of $2.3 million from joint accounts into offshore havens. Delusional jealousy and paranoid behavior consistent with postpartum psychosis. Even though Florence hadn't given birth yet. Every lie was backed by fabricated evidence. Doctored hotel receipts, forged bank transfers, a psychiatric evaluation signed by Dr. Raymond Mills, a man who'd lost his medical license in 2019 for falsifying records. Lucas arrived 20 minutes later, playing the concerned husband to perfection. His eyes were red-rimmed like he'd been crying, his suit slightly rumpled like he hadn't slept. He found Florence in the conference room, the divorce papers spread before her like autopsy reports. "Florence," he said, his voice breaking beautifully. "I didn't want it to come to this. But you've left me no choice." Florence looked up at him and she let every ounce of her anguish show. "Lucas, please. I don't understand. What affair? What money? I've never." "Don't lie to me." Lucas slammed his hand on the table and Florence flinched. A genuine reaction that made him smile behind his mask of anger. "I have proof, Florence. Bank records. Hotel surveillance. You've been stealing from us, and when I confronted you, you became unstable. Violent even." "That's not true," Florence whispered, her hand protectively over her belly. "Lucas, I'm carrying your daughter. How can you?" "That's exactly why I'm doing this." His voice softened into something that might have fooled her 6 months ago. "You need help, Florence. Professional help. The kind of help you'll get in a facility where they can monitor you, make sure you don't hurt yourself or the baby." A facility. He was already setting the stage for institutionalization. Florence let the tears come. "Please don't do this. I'll do anything. Marriage counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just don't take my baby from me." Lucas's eyes flickered with triumph and Florence saw the monster beneath the mask. "It's too late, Florence. You should have thought about that before you betrayed me." He left her sobbing in that conference room, and Florence played the role until his footsteps faded. Then she pulled out her phone and texted Sungjae. He took the bait. The response came immediately. "Good girl. My team is moving." That night, Florence sat in the safe house watching Sungjae's hacker. A woman named Min who looked like she was 17 but moved through firewalls like a ghost. Infiltrate Vivian's laptop in real time. And what they found made Florence's blood turn to ice. Email chains between Lucas and Vivian detailing phase 3 of their plan. After the divorce, Lucas would have Florence involuntarily committed using falsified psychiatric records. Once institutionalized, she'd suffer a tragic suicide. An overdose of medications administered by a nurse Lucas had already paid off. The baby would be delivered via emergency C-section and given to Lucas. Florence would be cremated within 48 hours. They were planning to murder her and make it look like postpartum depression. Sungjae's hand closed over Florence's shoulder and she realized she was shaking. "Now do you understand?" he said softly. "This isn't divorce. It's premeditated murder. And if we don't destroy them first, you're dead." Florence looked at the evidence on the screen, her own death warrant written in clinical detail, and something inside her finally, irrevocably broke. "Burn them," she whispered. "Burn them all." Sungjae spread the financial records across the safe house dining table like a coroner laying out evidence of murder. Numbers bled across spreadsheets in red ink, damning and irrefutable. Florence stood over them, 7 months pregnant now, her hands pressed against the small of her aching back as she processed what she was seeing. Lucas has been embezzling from Whitmore Capital for 3 years, Sung-jae said, his voice clinical. $12 million, moved through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Singapore and Dubai. And every single technique he used to hide it came from your case files. Florence's breath caught. She remembered those files. Complex corporate fraud cases she'd worked before marriage, legal strategies for tracking hidden assets. She'd kept them in her home office, years of her best work. He stole my research? He married your research, Sung-jae corrected, and the words landed like a slap. Look at the timeline. Lucas met you 6 months after Whitmore promoted him to CFO. 3 months after that first date, the embezzlement began. Every wire transfer, every false invoice, every offshore account. It's all based on vulnerabilities you identified in your old cases. He pulled out another document. And this is why he needed the divorce now. Whitmore's annual audit is in 6 weeks. Lucas needed your $8 million inheritance to cover the missing funds before the auditors found the hole. Florence felt something crack inside her chest. She'd thought Lucas had loved her once at the beginning. That maybe the man she'd married had existed before greed corrupted him. But this was premeditation from the first smile, the first kiss, the first time he'd whispered I love you while mentally calculating her net worth. I was never his wife, she whispered. I was a strategy. Sung-jae moved closer and Florence felt the heat of him at her back. You were a target, but you're a weapon now. And we're going to use Lucas's greed to destroy him. 2 days later, Florence sat in a Manhattan boardroom 60 floors above the street, watching Sung-jae negotiate with Richard Whitmore himself. The CEO was 70, silver-haired, with eyes like a hunting bird. Sung-jae had laid out the evidence of Lucas's theft with the precision of a surgeon. Bank records, wire transfers, falsified invoices that had bled Whitmore Capital of millions. Why bring this to me? Whitmore demanded. What do you want? Cooperation, Sung-jae replied. Lucas Hank is trying to destroy my associate. He gestured to Florence, who sat silent and heavily pregnant in a chair by the window, to cover his crimes. I want him to think he's won. I want you to promote him, transfer him to your London office, make him believe he's escaping scrutiny. And when he's convinced he's untouchable, we spring the trap. Whitmore studied Florence with sharp intelligence. You're his wife. For now, Florence said, her voice steady. But I'm also the attorney who's going to make sure he never sees freedom again. A slow smile spread across Whitmore's face. What do you need from me? The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Whitmore called Lucas into his office the next morning and offered him the London position. A massive promotion, effective immediately. Lucas nearly wept with relief. He thought he was escaping the audit, escaping Florence, escaping everything. He called Vivian from Whitmore's lobby and Sung-jae's team recorded every word. We did it, baby. London posting. They'll never find the money, and by the time the audit happens I'll be untouchable. Florence will be locked up and we'll be free. That night, Florence stood at the safe house windows watching Manhattan glitter like broken glass. Sung-jae appeared beside her with whiskey he didn't offer and proximity that made her pulse race. Lucas leaves for London in 3 days, he said. Vivian's planning a celebration dinner tomorrow night at Daniel. She thinks she's won. Florence's reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Harder, colder, more dangerous. Then let's give her a reason to celebrate. Right before we take everything. Sung-jae's hand found hers in the darkness, and this time she didn't pull away. Florence found Vivian at a bougie coffee shop in Soho, the kind where lattes cost $18 and everyone pretended to work on screenplays. Vivian sat at a corner table in Chanel sunglasses and a cream blazer, scrolling through her phone with the satisfied air of a woman who thought she'd already won. She didn't see Florence approach until it was too late. Vivian, Florence said softly, channeling every ounce of brokenness into her voice. Please. I just need to understand. Vivian's head snapped up, her perfectly painted lips curving into something between surprise and contempt. She removed her sunglasses slowly, deliberately. Florence. You look unwell. Florence was wearing the wire Sung-jae's team had given her, nearly invisible, taped between her breasts where her maternity dress concealed it perfectly. She let her hands shake as she slid into the chair across from Vivian. Lucas is gone. The divorce is happening. I need to know why. Were you ever really my friend? Vivian's laugh was crystalline and cruel. Your friend? Florence, you were my boss. My mentor. The woman who had everything I wanted. The career, the reputation, the brilliant legal mind everyone worshipped. And you threw it all away to play housewife. She sipped her oat milk latte. Lucas and I started sleeping together the night of your pregnancy announcement. You were so glowing, so nauseatingly happy. He came to my apartment afterward and said, I just locked down $8 million and a built-in legal consultant. We laughed about it for hours. Florence's vision blurred, but she kept her voice steady. The forgeries. The planted evidence. How long have you been planning this? 6 months. Vivian leaned forward and Florence could smell her perfume, the same one Florence used to wear. Every document, every signature, every offshore account. I did the legal work while Lucas handled the performance. The institutionalization plan was my idea, actually. Once you're committed, you'll have an unfortunate medication overdose. These things happen with unstable pregnant women. So tragic. Florence's hand moved protectively to her belly, and Vivian's eyes tracked the movement with predatory focus. Oh, and speaking of pregnancy, Vivian said, her smile turning venomous, I should probably tell you, I'm 10 weeks along. Lucas's baby. The one he'll actually want. She paused, savoring Florence's shock. Which means your baby is inconvenient. I've been replacing your prenatal vitamins with something special for the last month. Should trigger a miscarriage any day now. Stress does terrible things to pregnant women, doesn't it? The world tilted sideways. Florence's vitamins. The ones in her medicine cabinet at the penthouse. The ones she'd been taking every morning before sneaking back to the safe house. Vivian had been poisoning her. Had been trying to murder her unborn daughter for a month. Florence barely made it to the bathroom before her stomach emptied violently. She collapsed against the stall door, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, her hands pressed against her belly where her daughter kicked frantically as if sensing her mother's terror. The bathroom door opened. Heavy footsteps. Then Sungjae was there, ignoring the fact that this was the women's restroom, pulling Florence into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted everything he was. His hands were steady on her back, his voice a low murmur in Korean that she didn't understand but felt in her bones. She tried to kill my baby, Florence choked out against his chest. She's been poisoning me. She's pregnant too and Sungjae's entire body went rigid. When Florence looked up, his eyes were black ice, dead and lethal. Say the word, he whispered, his accent thick with barely controlled violence. One word, Florence, and Vivian Chen disappears. No body. No evidence. Just gone. Florence should have been horrified. Should have said no. But in that moment, sobbing in a coffee shop bathroom in the arms of a mafia boss who looked at her like she was something sacred and breakable, she understood the terrible truth. Sungjae would kill for her without hesitation. Would burn the entire city down if she asked. And God help her, she wanted him to. Not yet, she whispered. I want her to suffer first. Sungjae's smile was devastating. That's my girl. The Plaza Hotel ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewel box, crystal chandeliers throwing prismatic light across Manhattan's elite in their black tie finest. 300 of the city's wealthiest power brokers mingled beneath baroque ceilings, champagne flowing, diamonds catching light, everyone performing the choreographed dance of old money and new ambition. Lucas stood near the podium in a tuxedo that probably cost $5,000, his arm around Vivian Chen, who looked predatory in emerald silk. They were laughing, heads bent together, the picture of a couple who'd already won. Then the ballroom doors opened and every conversation died. Florence Hank entered in a gown the color of fresh blood, silk that clung to her 7-month pregnant belly like a declaration of war. Her natural hair was swept into an elegant updo, diamonds at her throat that Sungjae had insisted she wear, armor, he'd called them. And on her arm, moving through the crowd like death in an impeccable tuxedo, was Sungjae himself. Every person in that room knew who he was. The whispers started immediately, a wave of shock and terror rippling through Manhattan's elite. That's Sungjae. The Korean. What is Florence Hank doing with him? Lucas's face drained of color. Vivian's champagne glass trembled in her hand. Florence met Lucas's eyes across the ballroom and smiled. The smile of a predator finally done playing prey. At exactly 9 p.m. Lucas made his move. He approached the podium where the charity's chairman was about to speak, whispering urgently. The microphone crackled to life, and Lucas's voice filled the ballroom with practiced devastation. I apologize for the interruption, but I need to make a statement. My wife, Florence Hank, has been embezzling from our joint accounts for months. I've tried to handle this privately, but, his voice broke beautifully, I can't protect her anymore. I have evidence of fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes that I'm turning over to the authorities tonight. Vivian materialized beside him with a folder, her face the picture of professional concern. 2 uniformed NYPD officers stood near the entrance. Lucas's cousin Marcus and his partner, already moving toward Florence. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Florence stood perfectly still, Sungjae's hand at the small of her back, and waited. I'm sorry it came to this, Florence, Lucas said into the microphone, and Florence saw the triumph in his eyes. But you need help. Then every screen in the ballroom, the massive displays meant for the charity's presentation, flickered to life. Security footage filled the screens. Lucas and Vivian in Florence's study, shattering the window from the inside, planting forged documents in her safe. The timestamp clear. The audio crystal. The prenup protects nothing if she's a criminal. She'll give birth in prison and you'll have full custody and all her money. The ballroom went silent except for the damning audio playing from speakers designed for inspirational speeches about philanthropy. More footage. Lucas meeting with his accountant, discussing the $12 million he'd stolen from Whitmore Capital. Vivian bribing the ethics review board. Bank records scrolling across the screens showing every offshore account, every forged transfer, every stolen dollar traced back to Lucas's personal accounts. And then the final blow. Medical records showing Vivian had purchased miscarriage-inducing drugs. Pharmacy receipts. Text messages between Vivian and Lucas discussing how to eliminate Florence's brat before their own baby was born. Once she miscarries, she'll be too broken to fight. Then we finish her. The room exploded into chaos. Lucas tried to run, but Sungjae's men materialized at every exit, silent, lethal, blocking every escape route. Vivian's emerald gown was suddenly the brightest target in the room as photographers' cameras flashed, capturing her horror for tomorrow's front pages. Detective Marcus Hank stood frozen, his hand on his radio, watching his cousin's crimes play out in high definition. And then Sungjae stepped forward from the shadows, and the ballroom went absolutely silent. Everyone knew what he was. Everyone knew what he was capable of. When he spoke, his voice carried without the microphone. Mr. Hank, you have 2 choices. Confess everything to the police right now. He paused, his smile deadly. Or we discuss this privately in the kitchen. Lucas was weeping openly now, his perfect facade shattered. It wasn't supposed to, I didn't mean. Florence stepped forward, magnificent in red, her hand protectively over her belly. She pulled the wire recording from her dress, the confession Vivian had given her in the coffee shop, and handed it to Detective Marcus. Attempted murder, she said clearly. Conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, and poisoning a pregnant woman. I believe that's enough for an arrest. Vivian screamed as the handcuffs closed around her wrists. Lucas collapsed to his knees, destroyed. And Florence walked out of the Plaza Hotel on Sungjae's arm like a queen leaving a massacre, leaving behind the ashes of everyone who'd tried to destroy her. Lucas's Italian leather shoes slipped on marble as he bolted toward the plaza's side exit, his tuxedo jacket flying behind him like broken wings. He made it 3 steps before he saw them. 4 men in black suits, hands folded, faces expressionless, blocking the doorway with the immovability of tombstones. He pivoted toward the service entrance. 2 more men. The main doors. 6 more. Every exit was sealed. The ballroom had erupted into controlled chaos. Guests pulling out phones, photographers circling like sharks, the NYPD officers speaking urgently into radios. But all of it faded to background noise when Sungjae moved through the crowd, and the sea of Manhattan's elite parted for him like he was radioactive. Everyone in that room knew who he was. The Korean. The man who'd walked out of a federal courtroom 3 years ago when he should have died in prison. The monster in expensive suits who controlled half of New York's underworld while the other half pretended he didn't exist. When Sung-jae spoke, the ballroom went silent except for the damning audio still playing from the screens. Mr. Hank. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. You seem to be looking for an exit. There isn't one. Lucas backed against the podium, his face flushed and tear-streaked, all his polish stripped away to reveal the terrified animal beneath. You can't, I have rights. You can't threaten me in front of witnesses. Sung-jae smiled and several people in the crowd visibly flinched. I'm not threatening you. I'm offering you a choice. He gestured to Detective Marcus Hank, who stood frozen with his hand on his weapon, clearly torn between family loyalty and the evidence playing on loop behind him. You can confess everything to the police right now. Every crime, every lie, every forged document. Full cooperation. He paused and the silence stretched like a blade. Or we can discuss this privately in the kitchen. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise of death delivered in a tone reserved for discussing the weather. Everyone in that ballroom understood. Lucas would confess or Lucas would disappear and no one, not the NYPD, not the FBI, not God himself, would find what was left of him. Lucas's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, weeping openly, all his charm and confidence bleeding out onto imported marble. I did it, he sobbed. All of it. The embezzlement, the forgeries framing Florence. I needed her money to cover what I stole from Whitmore. I planned to have her institutionalized and... His voice broke, and eliminated. It was all me. Vivian screamed from where two officers held her. He's lying. I was manipulated. Lucas told me she was abusive, that she was stealing from him. I was trying to help. Florence stepped forward and every eye in the ballroom locked on her. 7 months pregnant and devastating in blood-red silk, holding a small recording device that caught the light like a weapon. This is Vivian Chin, recorded 4 days ago, admitting she forged documents, bribed ethics officials and purchased miscarriage-inducing drugs to poison my prenatal vitamins and kill my unborn daughter. Florence's voice was steady, cold, absolutely merciless. She wasn't manipulated. She was a co-conspirator planning murder. She pressed play. Vivian's voice filled the ballroom, crystal clear and damning. I've been replacing your prenatal vitamins with something special for the last month. Should trigger a miscarriage any day now. Your baby is inconvenient. The collective gasp from 300 people sounded like a death rattle. Vivian's face crumbled, her emerald gown suddenly looking like a costume on a woman playing dress-up in someone else's life. Detective Marcus moved forward with handcuffs, his jaw tight. Lucas Hank, Vivian Chin, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement and attempted poisoning of a pregnant woman. The cameras flashed like lightning as the cuffs clicked shut. Lucas was still weeping. Vivian was screaming about lawyers and wrongful arrest and how this couldn't be happening to her. Florence turned away from both of them like they were already ghosts. Sung-jae offered his arm and Florence took it, her hand steady on his sleeve. They walked through the stunned crowd toward the exit, and people moved aside like they were royalty, or like they were too dangerous to touch. As they reached the doors, Florence heard someone whisper, "Did you see her face? She's not the victim anymore. She's something else entirely." Outside, the Manhattan night was cold and glittering. Sung-jae's Mercedes waited at the curb, and when he opened the door for her, Florence looked back at the plaza one last time. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. Sung-jae's hand found hers in the darkness. "No, Florence. It's just beginning." 3 months after the Plaza massacre, Florence stood in Sung-jae's penthouse 70 floors above Manhattan, watching her daughter Luna sleep in a bassinet that probably cost more than most people's cars. The baby was perfect. Dark curls, warm brown skin, her father's absolutely nothing because Lucas Hank had never deserved to create something so beautiful. Luna was hers. Only hers. And she was safe. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting, and Florence could see her reflection in the glass. Sharper now, harder, wearing a black dress that cost a fortune and authority like a second skin. She'd rebuilt everything Lucas tried to destroy. Her own law firm specializing in impossible cases, her reputation restored and amplified by the scandal, her $8 million inheritance secured and growing. She was more successful now than she'd ever been. But she hadn't come here to celebrate. You've been watching me for 3 years, Florence said without turning around. She heard Sung-jae enter from his study, felt his presence like heat at her back. You knew about Lucas's affair within weeks. You watched him forge documents, steal my work, plan my destruction. And you did nothing. I did everything, Sung-jae corrected quietly. I had surveillance on your home, your office, every place Lucas went. I knew about Vivian before you did. I watched your marriage rot from the inside because I was waiting. Florence spun to face him, fury and something darker burning in her chest. Waiting for what? For me to almost die? For them to poison my baby? Waiting to see if you'd remember who you were. Sung-jae stepped closer, and in the low light he looked like something carved from shadows and danger. You were a predator, Florence. One of the most brilliant legal minds I'd ever seen. And you let that man convince you to be soft, to be small, to sacrifice everything you were for a marriage that was always a lie. I wanted to see if you'd save yourself. That's sick, Florence whispered, but her voice shook. You played with my life like it was a game. No. Sung-jae's hand reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything he was. 3 years ago you looked at me, a monster everyone feared, and you saw a human being worth defending. You were the only person in 15 years who didn't flinch when I walked into a room. You fought for me like I mattered. His voice cracked just barely. I fell in love with you in that courtroom and I've been yours ever since. Florence's breath stopped. The city glittered behind them, indifferent to the moment breaking between them. I don't expect you to love me back, Sung-jae continued, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I don't expect forgiveness for watching instead of intervening sooner. But I will spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever hurts you again. That's not negotiable. That's not a choice. You're in my blood now, Florence, and I don't know how to be anything but yours. Florence should have run. Should have taken Luna and disappeared. Because this man was dangerous and obsessive and had manipulated her life from the shadows. But standing there with his hand on her face and 3 years of longing crackling between them, Florence realized the truth. She didn't want to run. She wanted to burn. Florence grabbed his shirt and pulled him down, and their kiss was a collision. Fury and hunger and 3 years of watching from opposite sides of an invisible line. Sung-jae's hands tangled in her hair, and Florence tasted danger and devotion and something that might destroy them both. When they finally broke apart, gasping, Florence whispered against his mouth, I don't trust you. Sung-jae's smile was devastating, all sharp edges and dark promise. Good. You shouldn't. Luna stirred in her bassinet and Florence pulled away to check on her daughter. The child she'd protected, the future she'd fought for, the life she'd reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal. When she turned back, Sung-jae was watching her with that same hungry intensity that had terrified and thrilled her from the beginning. So what happens now? Florence asked. Sung-jae handed her a folder, her first case as his partner, not his client. A corporate executive who'd destroyed a whistleblower's life, untouchable by conventional law. The kind of case that required someone willing to get their hands bloody. Now, Sung-jae said, pulling her close, we become the thing they all fear. You're my conscience. I'm your weapon. And together we collect what's owed. Florence opened the folder and something dark and satisfied unfurled in her chest. Lucas had tried to destroy her. Instead, he'd created something far more dangerous. A woman who'd learned that sometimes you need a monster to fight monsters. And sometimes that monster looks at you like you're the only light in his darkness. Florence kissed Sung-jae again, slower this time, a promise and a threat. Manhattan glittered below them, full of people who'd soon learn that Florence Hank wasn't a victim anymore. She was a reckoning. And she was just getting started. And that's how Florence Hank went from victim to queen, with the most dangerous man in New York at her side. What did you think? Was Sung-jae's obsessive protection romantic or terrifying? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you loved this story of betrayal, revenge, and dark romance, make sure you're subscribed because we've got more explosive stories coming your way. Hit that like button, share this with someone who loves a good revenge story, and let me know where you're watching from around the world.